This woman was brutally murdered and then thrown into the River Severn by her Tinder date. Christina Rowe was excited when she matched with Charles Byrne on Tinder. She had dreams of becoming a model and moved from the Philippines to the UK to start a better life for herself and her daughter. She dated Charles for a while when she had initially matched with him on Tinder. However, her friends had started to warn her away from him. Her friends said he'd started acting strangely and being quite controlling and aggressive with her. Charles had schizophrenia, and according to Christina's friends, he'd started to act really erratically. They claim he had even been known to turn up to her house in the middle of the night. In Worcester in February 2021, in the midst of a paranoid delusion, Charles attacked Christina. He strangled her, stamped on her, and stabbed her. He then turned his attention towards her young daughter. He attempted to kill her too, but she was just knocked unconscious. He grabbed Christina's body and put her in a suitcase and threw her into the River Severn. In March 2022, Charles was given a life sentence. This was for manslaughter for Christina and for the attempted murder of her daughter. He spent some time in a secure mental health hospital before being transferred to prison. A TikTok influencer documented how hard she was finding life, and she's just murdered her entire family. Emily Long was a 34-year-old TikTok influencer and restaurant worker living in New Hampshire. Now, she started posting on TikTok fairly recently, actually, but her TikToks did gain views due to just her vulnerability and how honest she was being about her family life. She had a husband, Ryan, and they had 3 children together. These were Parker, 8, Ryan, 6, and a 3-year-old toddler. Things were far from perfect, and Emily was pretty open, like I said, and candid about this online. Tragically, her husband, Ryan, was actually suffering from brain cancer, and this was having a massive emotional impact on the whole family. Ryan had previously actually been a school psychologist. He was a very intelligent man, but now the family was facing the prospect of living without him. Now, the children were absolute rays of sunshine. They are just the most adorable kids. They were always loving being outdoors and playing with each other. They loved each other's company. Now, Emily referred to herself online as brain cancer wife, and viewers took comfort from her videos. Anyone else obviously struggling with a partner or a loved one with a terminal illness could feel like they could watch her videos and know that they weren't alone, until things turned darker than anyone could have imagined. Emily's videos included her chatting about how she was finding it so hard to stay strong while taking care of her 3 kids, and obviously her husband too. She was extremely honest about finding it really emotionally draining, and also just having this horrible prospect lingering over her of becoming a single mum and having to grieve her husband. She was not only mourning the future that she'd planned out in her head, but also she was worrying about finances. But she seemed determined to pull through. She kept saying how she was trying to get out of the depression she was in, change her mindset, and had even considered therapy. 2 days before the unthinkable tragedy, Emily posted a video stating, "All I want to do is hide under a blanket with my kids. Today I decided I need to make a conscious effort to shift my mindset." Then on Monday, the 18th of August, a tragic discovery was made. The bodies of Emily, husband Ryan, and their 2 children, Parker and Ryan, were found deceased in their home. Police believe Emily shot her 3 family members and then herself. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about the next part of this case, but her 3-year-old toddler was found in the home unharmed. I have no idea why she would leave the one child unharmed. I can't stand to even think about what that child must have witnessed, whether they did witness anything, and what their life is going to be like now that their whole family's been wiped out. These burglars drew their disguise on in permanent marker, meaning police knew exactly who had committed this crime. Now, when many criminals undergo criminal activities, one of the most important parts is not getting found out. It's obviously typical for offenders to usually wear some kind of disguise like a balaclava in order to prevent being caught. Matthew McNally and Joey Miller really didn't think through their disguise when they made plans to break into a man's house in Iowa. They decided to hide their faces by drawing on themselves in permanent marker. Now, obviously this did work initially and helped to conceal their identities. As the name suggests, permanent marker is notoriously difficult to remove. When police therefore went searching for suspects in the local area, the pair actually stood out like a sore thumb. They were obviously unable to remove the marker from their faces, and therefore it was really easy for police to identify them and then just to arrest them. This woman wrote a book about grief to help her children get over the loss of their dad. Now it's her who's charged with his murder. Corey Richins spoke in an interview about how shocked she was when her husband passed away unexpectedly. On March the 4th at roughly 3 a.m, a phone call came into police from 33-year-old Corey. She was reporting that her husband was unresponsive at their home in Utah. The two that night had been apparently celebrating buying a new home. She said she gave him a drink at around 9 and had gone to sleep with one of their children. Police raced to the scene to tragically find 39-year-old Eric deceased at the end of the bed. An autopsy was done on the father of 3, and it was found that he had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. Corey said that she had woken up at around 3 a.m. and gone into the room to find him cold. Although Corey had written a book to comfort kids dealing with grief, and she'd painted a picture of a grief-stricken family, behind the scenes, investigators were coming up with troubling information. There were inconsistencies in her story which cast serious doubt over her version of events. Corey tried to claim that she had performed CPR on her husband, but paramedics said that there was no evidence of this. She also said that while she had been asleep, her phone was on charge in the other room. However, she'd actually sent and deleted a number of messages during this time period. Just before his death, Eric had actually removed Corey from his will and his life insurance. He'd also been reportedly talking about wanting a divorce. On Valentine's Day, he became very sick and told a friend that he was worried she was trying to poison him. They had apparently been arguing about the new home that they were buying. Documents also reveal that apparently Corey had bought some substances off somebody on the 11th of February and then again just days before her husband passed away. She's currently charged with murder, and the children are being looked after by Eric's sister.
If you think nothing will truly disturb you or keep you up at night, I dare you to look up how many people have gone missing from Nome, Alaska. Because from 1960 to 2004 alone, 24 people disappeared from this remote, isolated town, and it is terrifying. That's what happened to Joseph Balderas and Florence Okpialuk, who disappeared within 4 years of each other in Nome. Residents in the town are on edge because of these mysterious disappearances that just keep happening, and the majority of them are still unsolved, so let's talk about it. This disturbing reality was brought to my awareness after listening to the Up and Vanish podcast, where the host, Hayden Lindsay, actually traveled to Nome to investigate the disappearances of Joseph and Florence. Their new season sheds light on how both of them seemingly vanished into thin air. Let's start with Joseph. Joseph moved to Nome in 2014 and quickly fell in love with the little town. He was a law clerk with Nome's 2nd District Court. He was described as incredibly smart, kind, and was good at pretty much everything he did. He was about to move to Juneau with his fiancée, and overall life just seemed really great for them. That is until June of 2016. Joseph was last seen on June 24th, 2016, but he very mysteriously disappeared after this, and what followed has never been explained. 3 days came and went with no sign of Joseph. His fiancée wasn't able to get a hold of him, and he no-called, no-showed work, which was extremely out of character for him. So one of his colleagues reported him missing, and a massive search was launched. That very same day, police found his abandoned truck at mile 44 of the Nome Council Highway. It was unlocked, and inside was his backpack that contained fishing supplies, waders, and boots, but Joseph was nowhere to be found. Police assumed that he was just in the area hiking or running, but it would soon be clear that something horrible happened to him. Police, along with search and rescue and the US Coast Guard, scoured the area for Joseph, but found nothing, and it was like he vanished into thin air. The search for Joseph was called off after just 9 days after finding no evidence of what happened to him. Police are not ruling out foul play, and there are some theories as to what could have happened, but to this day, Joseph and the truth remain missing. It didn't take long for tragedy to strike Nome again, because just 4 years later, another person would go missing under mysterious circumstances. Florence Okpialuk was 33 years old when she disappeared from Nome on August 31st, 2020. Florence was a native of Wales, Alaska, but had moved to Nome in 2013. Similar to Joseph, she was last seen leaving a tent on West Beach at around 4 p.m. that day, and after this, she vanished into thin air. A massive search for her was conducted as well, which involved Nome police, the FBI, and the US Coast Guard, but the only thing ever found was Florence's shoes, socks, and jacket. And just like Joseph, to this day, Florence remains missing. So I heard about this disturbing mystery after listening to the podcast Up and Vanished. I don't know if any of you listen to this podcast, but the host, Payne Lindsay, is so incredibly talented. This isn't just a typical true crime podcast, because Payne and his team have spent years working together and traveling to different places like Nome to get on-the-ground coverage, which is pretty rare for a podcast. He is extremely hands-on, and his approach is boots-on-the-ground investigative journalism, which I love. His new season already has 2 parts that are up and ready to listen to, and I highly suggest you all go listen to this. It's insane what he's able to uncover by simply going to these places and investigating, especially since these cases have stalled. So he's really picking up where the police have left off, directly working with the victims' families to get justice for their loved ones. You can listen to Up and Vanished on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but I'm curious to know what you guys think is really happening in Nome, Alaska.
This couple tortured and killed their live-in nanny over a member of Boyzone. 21-year-old Sophie Leonette was excited to be working as an au pair in London. She was hired by seemingly nice couple Sabrina and Usem. Little did she know Sabrina had a dark side. Sabrina was very much in charge of the household, and soon this idyllic job turned into a complete nightmare for Sophie. She was barely paid and they started to abuse her. She was losing a disturbing amount of weight, and neighbours said that when they saw her she seemed down and depressed. Bizarrely, Sabrina mistakenly convinced her that Sophie was actually spying on the couple for Sabrina's ex, Mark Walton. Mark was actually in the original lineup of the boy band Boyzone, and this was completely untrue. The pair didn't even know each other. Heartbreakingly, police would later find an entry in Sophie's diary titled "Why Me?" The pair would beat her and whip her regularly. When neighbours noticed a bad smell and smoke coming from the property, they alerted police. Authorities discovered a grill with chicken on in the back garden, along with a burn pit, a human nose and fingers. The couple tried to blame each other in court, but ultimately they were both sentenced to 30 years in prison.
How do you accidentally stuff yourself inside of a burn barrel and then sink to the bottom of a pond on your own property? Because that's what police are saying happened to her, and I am not convinced. Let's talk about the mysterious death of Debbie Wolfe, otherwise known as the body in the barrel. So on December 25th, 1985, 28-year-old Debbie finished her shift as a nurse at a local hospital in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She left around 4 p.m. and was likely headed to her isolated cabin about 4 miles from the city. She lived in the cabin alone, and although it was pretty desolate and heavily wooded, she had her 2 dogs to keep her company. She was supposed to go back to work the next morning at 8, but she never showed, and she never called either. This was especially odd because Debbie literally never missed work. She was super reliable and always on time, but that morning nobody could get into contact with her, which worried her family. So her mom and a family friend drove to her cabin, and immediately upon arriving, they felt like something was wrong. Debbie was known to be extremely tidy and neat, but when her family got to her cabin, it was an absolute mess. First off, her dogs were running loose in the front yard, which Debbie never allowed, and they also hadn't been fed yet, which was unusual. Beer cans were littered all over the place, and it wasn't even a beer that Debbie was known to drink either. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Debbie's car was parked in a different spot than usual, and the front driver's seat was pushed all the way back. Keep in mind, Debbie was only 5'3", so this would have been way too far back for her to drive. So immediate red flags, right? Well, it only got worse when they went inside the cabin. It looked as if things had been thrown around inside, and her work uniform was laying on the kitchen floor. Her purse wasn't in its typical spot by the front door, but instead it was shoved into a tight spot under her bed. A light was blinking on her answering machine, indicating that she had a voicemail, and when her family played it, it sent chills down their spine. The voicemail was left earlier that morning, and it was from a man at the hospital Debbie worked at. It wasn't from her boss though. Instead, it was from a volunteer who called to ask how she was doing. The man goes on to say that Debbie had missed several days of work and he was worried about her, but her family knew right away that this was not true. In fact, Debbie had only missed a few hours of work at this point, as she was just there the day before. So obviously her mom became extremely worried, and the two began looking for Debbie outside the cabin and near the pond on her property, but they didn't find anything. They tried to report her missing to the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department, but they told her that she had to wait 72 hours to file a report. So 3 days came and went, but it would take police 5 days just to get involved. So already not off to a good start. When police searched Debbie's cabin, they didn't find anything either, and they even brought in bloodhounds. They told her family that there was no need to search the pond because they could see the bottom and clearly there was no body in the water. It seemed like the police honestly just didn't care, so Debbie's mom hired her own set of divers, and what they found is bizarre. The divers, along with Debbie's family friend, started wading through the water, and about 2 minutes in, they found what looked to be 2 sets of footprints and drag marks into the pond. When they went underwater, they immediately saw a 55-gallon burn barrel at the bottom, and stuffed inside, head first, was Debbie. Police were called back to the scene, but this is where things start to not add up. Debbie was dressed in clothes that weren't hers, including a men's jacket, a Pittsburgh Steelers t-shirt, pants that were way too long, a bra that was 3 sizes too big, and she had men's shoes on. So this is already odd, but adding to the mystery is the fact that there were no signs of foul play on her body at all. And after an autopsy was conducted, only half a teaspoon of water was found in Debbie's lungs. But even after all of this suspicious evidence, the medical examiner ruled that Debbie must have drowned, and it was all an accident. No drugs or alcohol were found in her system either. The police came up with the theory that Debbie must have been playing outside with her dogs that day and accidentally fell in the water. But this doesn't really make sense to me considering that she was found in 5.5 feet of water, about 30 feet from the bank of the pond. Now, to kind of paint a picture, the water surrounding the edge of this pond was only about an inch or two deep, and it very gently sloped down to the deepest part of the pond. For the most part, it was pretty much just knee deep unless you went extremely far out. So if she was playing with her dogs that day and just accidentally fell in, how did she end up 30 feet from the bank? She was known to be a good swimmer too, so I feel like if she fell in, she would have been able to get out pretty easily. But here's what's odd. As the investigation continued, police began denying that Debbie was found in a barrel, and they pretty much said that it never existed. When her mom double-checked with the divers and the family friend, they all said 100% she was found in a barrel, but they left it there, expecting the police to pick it up that day as evidence. But by the next morning, the barrel had vanished. Authorities said that the divers must have just thought that they saw a barrel, when really it was probably just Debbie's jacket they saw. They said that it must have just puffed up from the angle that she was laying at the bottom of the pond, making it look like a barrel. But Debbie's mom was not buying what they were telling her, and she even remembered that Debbie used to store her firewood in a burn barrel just like the one described. But when she went to go look for it at the cabin, it wasn't there. But what was there were the indents of the barrel, like it had recently been moved. Police say Debbie's death was accidental, but her mom believes that she was murdered, specifically by one of the men who volunteered at the hospital. Not long before Debbie died, she had told her family that a volunteer at her job wanted to date her, but she rejected the guy and said that they would be better off as friends. This man was reportedly interviewed the day her body was found, but was let go. And after refusing to take a polygraph test, he left town for good. It's weird to me that he left that voicemail for Debbie that day. It kind of seems like an alibi to me, trying to cover his tracks. Debbie's mom believes that she was murdered in her cabin, put inside the barrel to make it easier to roll to the pond, and then dropped in. She thinks the killer then returned to the site after the fact to take the barrel, since it was never found, as a way to make her death look accidental. There are just so many things about this case that point to it being a homicide. For starters, if what police are saying is true, that she was never in a barrel and just in the water, why was her body and the clothes she had on completely clean? You would think that if she had been in the water for 6 days that she would be covered in debris, or at least have insect bites or something, but she was completely clean. The beer cans scattered in her yard were never tested for DNA either, so either the police really dropped the ball or they're trying to cover something up. And because Debbie's death was ruled an accident, all of her records have since been destroyed. It's now been 39 years, and whatever happened to Debbie that cold winter day remains a mystery.
Imagine showing up to the school gates to find a student's severed head. This is the horrifying case of the Kobe child murders. It was the 27th of May 1997 in Tane-O-Hata. Just hours before students were due to attend school that day, the caretaker turned up and found something horrific. A special education student's head lay severed by the gate of the elementary school. The victim was John Hayes, aged just 11. He'd gone missing days prior. He'd been decapitated with a saw and a note had been shoved in his mouth. This stated, "This is the beginning of the game. Try to stop me if you can, you stupid police." It talked about wanting to take more victims and how, for the killer, this was a thrill. No one had any idea who could have committed such a brutal crime. Days after the killing, a local newspaper received a letter. The author claimed responsibility for the brutal killing. They also threatened to take more lives. Killer stated, "It's only when I kill that I'm liberated from the constant hatred that I suffer, and that I'm able to attain peace." The media actually ran a story about this and pronounced the killer's name wrong, which angered the murderer. He then sent another ominous message to the newspaper. This stated, "From now on, if you misread my name or spoil my mood, I will kill 3 vegetables a week." And by vegetables, he means humans. "If you think I can only kill children, you are greatly mistaken." Now, the murder victim's body was ultimately found on a hill known as Tank Mountain. It transpired later that the killer had lured the little boy there, telling him he'd seen a giant turtle. He killed him, severed his head, and then took it to the school. But this was not the killer's only victim. Earlier in February that year, he launched a brutal attack on 2 schoolgirls. Both thankfully survived, but the following month, another victim was not so lucky. On the 15th of March, 10-year-old Ayaka Yamashita was struck from behind with a hammer. She tragically passed away from her injuries. Now, police were frantically searching the local area for any clues as to who could have committed this crime. Finally, there was a breakthrough. They found a knife. This knife was located by a local schoolboy's home. The 14-year-old junior high school student was then apprehended and ultimately did confess to these brutal killings. No one could have predicted that the person responsible for 2 murders had been a child. Officers also discovered that there were details of the first killing in this schoolboy's secret diary. Due to his age, at the time his identity was kept hidden. It was later released that his name was Shinichiro Azuma. They conducted handwriting analysis on this boy and compared it to the letters that had been written to the newspaper and found that it was in fact the same person. He was imprisoned at the time, but apparently has now been released and is living in Tokyo.
What's a true crime case that keeps you up at night? I always think about the suspicious death of Keith Warren and how he was found hanging from a tree in clothes that weren't his. If there's ever a case that needs to be reopened, it's this one. On July 29th, 1986, 19-year-old Keith Warren left his home in Silver Springs, Maryland to go hang out with some friends. Keith lived with his mom and sister and was described as really quiet, but he was loved by a lot of people. He was just about to start college in the fall and he had his whole life ahead of him, but the events that followed have never really been explained. When Keith didn't return home that night, his mom reported him missing to the Montgomery County Police Department, but they told her that unless he was on medication or in some way disabled, she would have to wait 48 hours to file a missing persons report. So because of this, Keith's family and friends took it into their own hands to begin searching for him. But one person looking for him stood out. His name was Mark Finley, and he was someone who went to the same school as Keith. Mark seemed overly concerned with finding Keith, which was odd to Keith's actual friends because the two weren't close, and Mark wasn't even from the same neighborhood. In fact, the last time Mark and Keith were seen together, the two had gotten into a fight, so it was odd to a lot of people that Mark became so involved in looking for him. But 2 days later, a woman called police to report a suicide. When paramedics and police arrived, they found Keith's body hanging from a tree in a wooded area behind his family's home. The call came from a woman named Michelle, and she was the one that actually led police into the woods to find Keith's body. Almost immediately, the lead detectives on this case, Detective Leverett and Detective Beasley, ruled Keith's death as a suicide. But here's where things start to get odd. The Montgomery County Police immediately took Keith's body down from the tree without it being thoroughly examined by anyone with a medical background. After his body was taken down, they sent it off to a funeral home to be embalmed without even notifying Keith's family, and they didn't find this out until 6 hours later after the embalming had already taken place. No criminal investigation took place, and despite Maryland law, no autopsy was ever done. The crime scene was never taped off, and no potential witnesses were ever interviewed. And what's crazy is the fact that the first paramedic on the scene that day even wrote and signed a notarized document stating that he believed Keith did not die by suicide. Regardless, the medical examiner ruled Keith's death a suicide, and his mom initially believed them until suspicious things started happening left and right. Just a few weeks after Keith's death, she went to the site where he was found, and she was startled to see that the tree he was hanging from had been cut down. The police said that it was taken in for evidence, but the case was already closed and deemed a suicide. Then crucial pieces of evidence started turning up missing, like the actual tree Keith was found hanging from, and conveniently the 2 ropes that had been used to hang him. How do you lose an entire tree? Then after 6 years of being stonewalled by police, Keith's mom found a manila envelope with no return address sitting on her front doorstep. Oddly enough, this came exactly on April 9th, 1992, what would have been Keith's 25th birthday. Inside the envelope were photos of the crime scene, which showed Keith hanging from the tree that day. In those photos, the clothing that Keith was wearing were not his, down to the white sneakers that he had on. The only clothes ever given back to the family by the 2 detectives were Keith's jacket and his brown boots, which were not on him in the photographs. But what's shocking is the fact that in those photos, Keith had a bunch of leaves on the back of his shirt, indicating that someone had laid him on the ground before hoisting him up in the hanging position that day. Police did confirm that they were the real crime scene photos, but to this day, no one knows who sent them or how exactly they got them. Also included with the photos, though, was a letter that specifically mentioned Mark Finley, the guy who was overly concerned with finding Keith. The letter said, quote, "Mark Finley will be next." End quote. Shortly after this, Mark actually called Keith's mom and said that he wanted to come over and talk to her because he needed to unload. But before he got the chance to do so, Mark ended up dead. He was apparently riding his bike and accidentally hit a curb, causing him to fly off. But according to authorities, the damage to his body did not match the accident. His face was badly injured and it looked like he had been beaten with a baseball bat, but his death was ruled an accident. It was never reopened, and therefore he was never questioned further in Keith's death, which is a shame because he reportedly bragged about helping hang Keith in the tree. Some people think that he was murdered too. Keith's family ended up hiring another forensic pathologist, so they exhumed his body for an autopsy, and the findings are horrific. This pathologist stated that they don't believe that he died from the hanging, and this is specifically based on the toxicology report that he ran. He found extremely high and deadly amounts of paint thinners in Keith's body. This pathologist fully believes that with the abnormal amount of this toxin in his body, he wouldn't have the ability to hang himself, let alone even make the decision to. He would have been so mentally confused and likely not even coherent. They stated that Keith's death should be investigated as a homicide because his death was likely caused by these toxins, and the hanging was possibly a cover-up. Also adding to this is the fact that Keith showed almost no signs of injury to his neck, and that the tree he was found hanging on was so small that the way he was hanging would have been practically impossible to do to himself. Since there was never an initial autopsy done, no time or date of death was ever determined, and with the original detectives losing so much evidence on top of this, it really does seem like Keith was murdered and that it was covered up, and his family agrees, saying that his death was labeled a suicide with no credible evidence. Keith's mom was the only one to fully investigate her son's death in hopes for answers, and she even created the Keith Warren Justice Foundation, but she sadly died in 2009 without ever knowing what really happened to her son. Keith's sister is now fighting for justice, and all she wants is a simple criminal investigation into his case. An investigation that should have happened from the start. The state of Maryland has recently agreed to reclassify his death as undetermined rather than suicide, but it's left many wondering what truly happened to Keith that day and who put him in that tree.
Welcome back, and today let's talk about the 11-year-old strangler. Mary Bell was born in May 1957 in Newcastle, England. Mary Bell unfortunately did not have the best beginning. Sources say that when her mother gave birth to her, she yelled at the nurses, "Get her away from me." Not much is known about her mother other than the fact that she was a sex worker and that she heavily neglected Mary Bell. She would frequently leave Mary with random people while she went and did work for weeks. People claimed that when her mother was around, Mary would be seen with a lot of injuries. This led people to believe that her mother was actually abusive. It was never proved, but it was kind of obvious. Her mother always made it very clear that she was not wanted. As Mary grew, she started showing signs of disturbed behaviors. She would frequently fight other kids her age and try to strangle them. She was known to be a very angry child. And safe to say, she wasn't too popular amongst the kids. They were pretty scared of her, but she did have one friend, Norma Jean. Norma Jean and her went to school together, and they were also next-door neighbors. One day, a 3-year-old boy was found wandering by himself, and apparently he looked dazed, confused, and he was bleeding from his head. When confronted and asked what happened, he said that Mary Bell and Norma pushed him off a wall. He said it was more Mary, but Norma was also there. Around the same time, authorities were also contacted by a few more sets of parents saying that Mary and Norma had tried to strangle kids on the playground. When the two girls were confronted about their behavior, they simply said that they weren't capable of doing that to other kids and that it was just for fun. Due to how young the two girls were, the police couldn't really do anything about it. The police did in fact, though, keep Mary Bell on record for having aggressive tendencies. And unfortunately, since she wasn't stopped there, the next kid wasn't so lucky. And that's when Mary Bell, at 10 years old, committed her first murder. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but come back for part 2 to see what happens next. Because this story is truly insane. And if you're watching this on the day it's come out, I promise it'll be up for you tomorrow. See you there.
I just don't understand how someone can be killed and it's all caught on camera, yet the killer is just never found. I'm talking about the murder of Liz Barraza. She was setting up for a garage sale in the early morning hours of January 25th, 2019, when someone dressed in a disguise was caught on multiple cameras walking up to Liz and shooting her 4 times at point blank range. I truly just don't get how this case is still unsolved. So at around 6 that morning, Liz gets a coffee from a local Starbucks. She then drives back to her house in Tomball, Texas in the Princeton Place subdivision and starts setting up for a garage sale. Liz wanted to do the garage sale to earn some extra money for her and her husband Sergio's 5th wedding anniversary that would take place in a few days. To celebrate, the two were going to Universal Studios in Orlando. Just the night before, Liz put out 2 signs for the garage sale, one at the entrance of their neighborhood and one just down the road. So at 6:47 that morning, Liz and Sergio start setting up for the garage sale before Sergio leaves for work. Around this time, a dark-colored Nissan Frontier truck is seen entering the neighborhood and parking down the road. A few minutes after Sergio leaves, the truck is seen driving towards Liz's home. Whoever's driving does a 3-point turn and parks behind Liz's car, and then they get out and start walking towards her. I want to point out what this person appears to be wearing. It's definitely a disguise of some sort, but it looks like they're wearing a wig and possibly a robe with some pointed boots or heels. At this point, Liz is still setting up for the garage sale, but she sees this person walking towards her, and you can actually hear Liz say good morning, which was captured on her doorbell camera. This person then says something to her for about 6 seconds before pulling out a revolver and shooting her 4 times. The first shot goes through the right side of Liz's neck. She's then shot twice in the chest, and as Liz drops to the ground, the killer stands over her and shoots her once more point blank in the face. The killer then runs back to their truck and drives off. Meanwhile, several of Liz's neighbors heard the gunshots and called the police, and while the neighbor across the street is on the phone with the operator, he sees the truck drive away. Liz's entire murder was caught on several of her neighbors' security cameras. I'm going to play part of that footage right now, so here it is. What's insane though is that just moments after the shooting, the killer then does a U-turn and drives back by Liz's house just to make sure she's dead. Police arrive just a few minutes later, but at this point, the killer is gone. Liz was then taken to the hospital where she sadly died a day later. Police initially thought that this was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was taken from her house or from the garage sale. And what's terrifying is that the killer was caught on security footage casing Liz's house before the murder as well. As early as 2 the morning she was killed, to be exact. The Harris County Sheriff's Office now believed that Liz's murder was planned because not only was the killer in disguise, but they also used a revolver that doesn't leave behind any shell casings. Adding to the theory that this was planned was the fact that Liz didn't publicly advertise that she was hosting a garage sale. It was never posted to her social media, and only a few people knew that it was going on outside of the 2 signs that she posted just the night before. Investigators began pulling video footage from commercial businesses nearby, and the killer's truck was caught on camera several times leaving the scene, but it was eventually lost in an area with no camera coverage. This was such a brutal murder that police began questioning why someone would do something like this, especially to Liz. Authorities combed through Liz and Sergio's digital footprint, but they found no evidence or really any reason why someone would want to kill her. Liz was a member of a Star Wars charity group and was described by so many people as being unbelievably kind. She didn't have any enemies, and because of this, her family believes that this was a murder for hire plot. Sergio states that he knows that he's the prime suspect in many people's eyes, but he denies having anything to do with Liz's murder. He moved out of the home not long after and remarried about a 1.5 years after Liz was killed. He says he connected with his new wife over similar experiences. His new wife had reportedly just lost her sister, so they bonded over their grief. Sergio says that he and his new wife have both taken polygraph tests and have passed them. I just will never understand why someone would do this to her and how they were literally caught on camera killing her, yet they've never been found. It's now been 5 years, and whoever killed Liz is still out there.
The most notorious serial killer family, the Bloody Benders. This case is going to take us back all the way to the 1870s in Kansas. This is a case of the old Wild West. At this time in American history, colonizers were pushing out the indigenous people off their lands and then selling their land to white settlers for very, very, very cheap. Because of this, many people were leaving their old lives, some of which were actually escaping their old lives, to move to the Midwest, the old Wild West, including that of the Bender family. At the time, many people believed that our two older Benders, named John and Kate, that we're going to refer to as Ma and Pa, were the parents of the two younger Benders, also named John and Kate. But the two younger John and Kate were oddly close, leading to many rumors about their relation at the time. Many people believe, actually, that they were a couple posing as brother and sister. The Bender family bought multiple acres, they had a large property, and then they built a very small cabin on the property that they lived at. They also used this cabin to double as a small business, so they opened a bit of like a grocery store and also an inn. Bender cabin was the only grocery store or inn for miles in any direction, so many of those people that were traveling to the Midwest to start new lives had to ultimately stop at the Bender cabin for a nice meal and a place to sleep. All was fine until those travelers began to disappear. Now let's talk about the Benders a little bit again. So Ma and Pa were extremely intimidating. Pa was this big, burly man, and then Ma was a bit of an a-hole. She was seen as extremely rude to her customers, and people in the area referred to her as the she-devil. The younger John was nice, but he kind of gave people the creeps. The only Bender that people actually liked was the daughter Kate. She was said to be incredibly beautiful, overly friendly, a tad flirty, and she would use her charm to convince the travelers to stay at her family's inn. Kate was also said to be a psychic medium and would sell her abilities out of her family's inn. So many of these travelers that were stopping by the Bender family inn were traveling to start new lives across the country. So they were traveling with all of their life savings and then any of their belongings that had any worth. After being charmed by Kate Bender to stay the night at her family's inn, share a meal with her, or witness her psychic abilities, they would be, sitting with their back turned to a canvas board that would separate the inn part to the actual family's living quarters. And then while they're sitting there, chatting up this beautiful young girl, John and Pa would sneak up behind them and bash them over the head with hammers. They would be robbed of everything that they owned before being buried on the property or dumped somewhere else, including that of a father named George and his very young daughter, Marianne. The daughter, Marianne's age has been debated because honestly, this story has become a bit of American folklore, but it is believed that she was about 7 years old. The father and daughter had plans of traveling through the Midwest and buying land in Iowa before they were never heard of again. They had a very close family friend named Dr. William York, who was expecting a letter from his friend when him and his daughter got to Iowa, but that letter never came. So Dr. York went looking for his missing friend and then was also never seen again. But Dr. York had two brothers who were pretty well off in their neighborhood. They were wealthy men, and they put together a search party of over 50 men to go looking for their missing brother. They questioned every single person and every single house across the trail through the Midwest, and it seemed that the last house that they were ever seen at was that of the Bender family. The Bender family were friendly and cooperative with the search party. They even told them that yes, Dr. York had stayed here overnight, but he had left in the morning, and they even blamed what happened to Dr. York as possibly being committed by the Native American people in the area. Kate Bender even offered to help the search party by using her psychic abilities to find out what happened to their brother for a fee, of course. The search party declined Kate Bender using her psychic abilities, and then they continued on in their search. Some time passed, and then the neighbors of the Bender family realized that they hadn't seen any members of the family in a long time. They checked their property, and the farm animals that they had on their land all looked extremely neglected, and they even found a baby cow passed away from dehydration. Inside of the Bender's cabin, all of their belongings were gone, and there was an overwhelming, terrible smell of death coming from a trap door that was hidden in the floor. When they went through the trap door, it took them to the cellar, and it was just absolutely covered in blood. They began digging on the property, and that's when they found nearly 20 bodies of the missing travelers, nearly half of which were never identified. And the Bender family was gone, never to be seen again. A large dead or alive bounty was put on the Bender family's heads, which led many vigilante groups to go hunting for the Benders, some of which said that they actually found the Benders and killed them, but they were never able to show their bodies, so this is probably a lie. And to this day, whatever happened to the Bender family when they escaped Kansas is one of the greatest mysteries of the Wild West. We know very little about who the Bender family really was, if their names were even John and Kate Bender, but I definitely am second guessing the people in my life with the last name Bender about their possible family lineage. We have covered quite a few older cases, but I do believe that this is the oldest case we've ever covered. If you like this, like diving a bit more into like the true crime history of decades and decades and hundreds of years in the past, let me know. We can definitely keep doing it. Let me know all your thoughts on this case in the comments, any of your theories, and while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much. Be safe this weekend, and I will see you tomorrow.
Tell me why right now there is a doll sealed behind glass and they say if you so much as look at it the wrong way, it could end your life? Have we maybe thought to burn it? You've probably seen her face before just sitting there smiling at you like it wants to possess you. They call her Annabelle, and no, she doesn't look terrifying. She looks harmless, just a simple Raggedy Ann doll, but I guess that's what makes her so dangerous. So don't let that fool you, because whatever's attached to her does not play nice. This evil spirit began in 1970. A nursing student named Donna gets this doll as a birthday gift from her mom, just a sweet, harmless present. Except days after, she starts noticing that the doll is moving. At first, it's just small things. Her arms would be in different positions and her head would be tilted the other way. And then it's sitting across the entire room in places that she never left it. Then came the notes, actually handwritten on little pieces of parchment, showing up around the apartment saying things like, "Help us." Except Donna didn't own any parchment paper. And then it gets worse. Donna and her roommate Angie, help, that's my name, they started hearing noises at night, like furniture shifting, soft footsteps in the apartment that's empty. And one night, their friend Louis was attacked. He swore he felt claws or something sharp cutting into his chest while sleeping. They checked him and there were actual scratches on his skin. At that point, they had no choice but to call for help, and that's when the Warrens show up. Ed and Lorraine Warren walked into that house and immediately said there is an evil spirit in this home, and whatever's attached to that doll is something inhumane. Something that wasn't pretending to be innocent, it was just biding its time looking for a human host. The Warrens took Annabelle that day, locked her inside of a sealed glass case inscribed with the Lord's Prayer and a giant warning sign saying, "Do not open." And to this day, people swear that you don't even have to touch her. Just say something disrespectful, crack a joke at her story, and you're done. One guy apparently laughed at her face, banged his fist against the glass, and walked out of that museum saying this is all fake. And guess what happened? He didn't make it home. He got into a motorcycle accident that same day and died instantly. But hey, that's a coincidence, right? Today, she's damn near on a tour going from place to place, but the same rules still apply. Do not touch her, do not taunt her, and don't test your luck. Because whether you believe in it or not, some things are not worth finding out the hard way. Thank you for being here with me because I am kind of scared now. I love you guys. I really hope to see you in my next video. Group hug.
The things that set people off these days are so insane, you just never know when it's going to happen. In this photo is a young woman named Annie Lee, and she was once voted by the rest of her peers as the most likely to be the next Einstein. So Annie had graduated from the University of Rochester, and that's where she had also met her future fiance, Jonathan. They both quickly fell in love, and eventually they got engaged and started planning their wedding for September 13th of 2009. After they both graduated, Annie ended up moving to New Haven in order to attend a Yale medical school, while her fiancé Jonathan stayed in New York to go to Columbia. On September 8, 2009, Annie had taken the shuttle to get to school that day. But when she didn't come home that evening by 9 p.m., her roommate started to get really worried and decided to report her as missing. Now, a search for Annie was done at the school, and right away inside her office, they did find her phone and her purse. However, there was zero sign of Annie anywhere. They then took a look at the CCTV footage of the school that day, and they actually did see Annie entering the school, but they never saw her leave, which was extremely odd because authorities' first theory is that she likely had gotten cold feet and just decided to run away days before her wedding. So based on the video footage they discovered, it was determined that she had gotten to the school around 10 a.m. and never left, which meant that she must still be inside somewhere. But it wasn't until 5 days later that they finally discovered what had actually happened to Annie. Inside the basement of the school, people started reporting a very foul smell, and so authorities quickly brought the search dogs to the school down to the basement to see what they would find. And surprisingly, they ended up discovering an 8-inch hole in the wall, but they were not ready for what they were about to find inside. Inside this tiny 8-inch hole was Annie's body that had been broken apart into pieces and stuffed inside. It had become apparent to authorities that SA was involved in the situation, and her collarbone and jawbone had also been fractured right before she passed away. And in the end, it was determined that she had passed away due to strangulation. So when authorities removed her body, they noticed that there was a sock that had been placed underneath her. They found this to be quite odd. It was very much out of place and it did not belong to Annie. So they continued their search throughout the basement, and in the end, they ended up discovering some more pieces in the ceiling. And this is where they discovered the other missing sock, along with a lab coat and a pair of work boots. Everything had been completely drenched in blood, and when they looked underneath the boots, they saw the name Ray C. And because authorities knew that anyone who accessed the building needed a special Yale ID key card, they knew it must have been either a student, a teacher, or someone that worked at the property. Not to mention that they basically had the killer's name written on the boot, which was Ray, so it didn't take very long for them to find out who had done this. Turns out that the person responsible for doing this to Annie was this guy here, Ray Clark. Well, he was a 24-year-old lab technician, but he had been known to cause a lot of problems with other people. His main job at the university was to sterilize lab equipment, but to also clean out mice cages. And when authorities looked into his ID card, they realized that he had been the only one aside from Annie that had gone into the basement that day. But of course, they all wanted to know, why would he do something like this to Annie? She was the last person that would ever hurt anyone. She didn't have any known enemies, so this just didn't make any sense. Well, it turns out that one time, Ray had actually sent Annie a very angry email because he was not happy with how dirty she had left the certain mice cages. Of course, Annie ended up profusely apologizing for this, and she told him that it wouldn't happen again. And when authorities looked into the text messages on Annie's phone, they discovered that Ray had actually messaged her on the day she went missing. He had messaged her that day asking if they could meet up to discuss the cleanliness of the cages for the mice. And they would also later confirm that his DNA was the one that was found on Annie's body and on the sock that was found underneath her. On September 17th, Ray was arrested for what he had done to Annie, and although people knew that he had a tendency to be a bit of a control freak and a little bit mean, they were all very surprised that he took it this far. Many people would later come forward stating that he treated the lab as his own personal property. Even his own fiancée would later come forward and say that he was extremely controlling to the point where he would not let her speak to other people in front of him. In the end, Ray did end up entering a guilty plea to unaliving Annie, but when it came to the SA, he entered an Alford plea, which led to him being sentenced to 44 years in prison, which means that he won't be released until 2053. And even though he did apologize in court for his actions, he never really explained what led him to do this to Annie. Don't let her innocent look fool you. This is Ella Holdridge, and when she was just a young girl, she did the absolute unthinkable. So Ella and her family are actually from Tonawanda, which is just outside of Buffalo, New York. And from a very young age, she started expressing very odd behavior. Even her mother realized this. From a very young age, she started developing this very weird obsession with funerals and the thought of passing away. It was even said that whenever she would see a funeral procession, she would chase after it because she wanted to see it for herself. And whenever someone passed away, it was said that she would start jumping for joy and act very happy about this. Eventually, though, this morbid curiosity of hers turned into a deadly obsession. In July of 1892, Ella May was said to have been playing with one of her neighbors. The little girl that Ella went to play with was just 7 years old, and her name was Louisa Stemner. Unfortunately, 2 days after she was seen playing with Ella, she became extremely sick. Her parents took her to the doctor, and unfortunately couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, and eventually she ended up passing away. Shortly after she passed away, she had her funeral, and of course Ella was there. A few days after the funeral, Ella was then seen playing with 2 other local girls. This isn't them, this is just for reference. The 2 girls were left home alone while their mother went to Buffalo to do some shopping. Ella took this as an opportunity to invite herself over to hang out with the girls, and that's where she said that she was going to make them a very special treat. But instead of making them a special treat like she promised, she decided to take some hot chocolate and put a bunch of rat poison in it. So she tells the 2 girls to drink it, but when one of them realized that it tastes really funny, Ella got extremely upset and basically forced it down the other girl's throat. Both of the girls felt like they had no choice since they were much younger than Ella, so they were forced to drink this hot chocolate poison, and just a few hours later, they both got incredibly sick. Of course, when their mother got home, she realized that they needed a doctor, so obviously they went, and that's when the doctor realized that the girls had been poisoned. It was then that the younger of the 2 sisters ended up blaming Ella for what happened. When police questioned Ella, initially she denied any involvement, but then she ended up saying, "Dear me, is that so?" Eventually, she ended up completely confessing to the crime, and she told police that she had used rat poison and that she did it because she thought that the two girls would look quote-unquote look nice unalive, and she also would get to go to their funerals. And throughout the entire confession, she was said to have had absolutely zero remorse. And when police asked if she had anything to do with Louisa's passing, she said that Louisa looked awfully nice at her funeral. And because Ella was a minor, she couldn't go to prison, so she was sent to a reformatory school. And at some point, as an adult, she ended up being released. She also went on to get married and even have 2 kids of her own before finally passing away in 1945.
Monsters like him just don't have a heart. Instead, Austin gets up and he walks into the bathroom and he turns on the faucet for the bathtub and he starts filling it up with hot water. And when the tub is full enough, when there's enough water to completely cover a person's head, Austin walks back to the bedroom and he grabs Jessica by her head and drags her across the floor into the bathroom. And Jessica's eyes probably fluttered just for a second as she feels herself being moved, like that survival instinct that maybe, just for a moment, there is this glimmer of hope that he changed his mind. Maybe he's actually gonna help her and this is going to end. But then Austin lifts her up and forces her face first into the bathtub, plunging her head straight under the water. And Jessica is probably fighting for her life, trying desperately to grab onto like the side of the tub to pull herself up. But Austin, this evil creature, is standing over her with his hands pressed firmly on the back of her head, using his entire body weight to hold her down, until eventually her body sadly goes completely still. And now Jessica Ridgway, the girl who woke up this morning excited to see her friends at school, the girl who hugged her mom not even a few hours ago, the girl who had all of these dreams and plans and a whole life ahead of her, is gone. But even with all of that pain that Austin just caused her, this vile creature isn't done with her. He's not even finished. Because while Jessica's body is still floating motionless in this bathtub with her face still submerged in the water, Austin very calmly walks out of the bathroom and gets his hands on a saw. Yes, a freaking saw. Like the thing that you would use for cutting wood or working on construction projects. And he begins dismembering her, using everything that he learned in his mortuary science class about how to body without making mistakes. Now, while all of this is going on, back at Jessica's house, Sarah is finally waking up. It's now 4 p.m. and she's been asleep for like hours and she's probably expecting for Jessica to be home already. But as you already know, Jessica is nowhere near the house. And when Sarah grabs her phone, maybe to check if Jessica texted her, she sees several missed calls from the school. And immediately, like instantly, her stomach drops and she can feel it in her bones that something really bad has happened. So she calls the school back and that's when they tell her the news that every single parent dreads hearing more than anything else in the world. Jessica never made it to school this morning. Now Sarah's brain probably tries to reject this information at first, right? Like finding some type of logical explanation that isn't absolutely terrifying. She's probably thinking, okay, this has to be a mistake. Maybe they forgot to mark her attendance or something. It happens all the time. But the school confirms it. Jessica definitely never arrived. But she couldn't find her anywhere, so rather than wasting more precious time, Sarah grabs her phone with her hands probably trembling from how anxious she is, and she dials 911. And within minutes, literally just minutes, police are pulling up in front of Sarah's house with these lights flashing really bright, and officers are spreading out across the neighborhood, knocking on every single door, asking if anyone saw anything unusual that morning. But no one heard or saw Jessica's screams for help that morning. No one. So for the rest of the entire day, even though officers issued an Amber Alert, even though Jessica's face was everywhere, no one knew that she was already gone. And it wasn't until 2 days later, a man, for story purposes we'll call Joe, is outside taking a walk around the neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon when something on the sidewalk catches his eye. And it's a black backpack just sitting there in the middle of the sidewalk, like someone deliberately placed it there. And Joe's thinking, okay, this is kind of weird. Something about this doesn't feel right. And he looks around to see if there's anyone nearby, but the street is completely empty. And with everything going on with Jessica's disappearance, with the Amber Alerts and the search parties and police everywhere, Joe honestly did not want to take any chances. So he pulls out his phone and he calls 911. And he's like, hey, there's this really suspicious bag here on the sidewalk near my house. Y'all should come and check this out like ASAP. And within minutes, police officers arrive to the scene and they approach the bag very cautiously, treating it like it might be evidence. And when they carefully unzip it and start looking inside, what they find makes their heart stop. First was a child's t-shirt completely soaked in urine, and then there was a pair of pants also wet, and a water bottle, and then, and this is when they know, a pair of purple framed glasses, the same purple glasses that Jessica was wearing when she left her house. And the last item that they pull is a keychain with the name Jessica written on it in colorful letters. The officers all look at each other and you can tell in their faces they know this is definitely Jessica Ridgway's backpack, which clearly means that something really, really bad happened to her. Someone kidnapped her. But the question still remained, who? Now, you and I obviously already know the answer to that question, but neither the officers or Sarah know that Austin, this 17-year-old boy who lives just 1 mile down the road, already kidnapped Jessica and killed her. And after taking her life, Austin quickly realizes, oh crap, this is a problem. Like, I've made a huge mess here and my mom's coming home soon. And as he's probably pacing back and forth thinking, oh my god, where do I put her? Where do I hide this? That's when this genius over here decides to just shove Jessica's body parts into this crawl space under his house. Real smart, Austin. You really thought that went through, didn't you? And at some point, Austin either sees the news or maybe an officer knocking on his door asking about Jessica, and he realizes that people are actually looking for this girl. And so now he knows it's only a matter of time before he actually gets caught. So either late that night or early morning on Sunday, he decides to grab Jessica's backpack along with her urine-soaked clothes and drive about 6-7 miles away to this random neighborhood and just place her bag there. I'm guessing he thought that if investigators found her bag there, then they would stop searching in his neighborhood and start searching somewhere else instead. Like, oh my god, I hate whenever these idiots think that they're so smart. Anywho, fast forward to about a week after Jessica disappeared, and no one, not her mom, not the cops, has any idea that they're never going to find Jessica alive. And I could imagine that by this point, Austin is probably feeling really confident. I mean, he still hasn't been caught, right? But I also think that this confidence is actually slowly fading away, because as investigators start bringing out helicopters and more search dogs, as these search parties keep growing and growing and growing, I can only imagine how stressful that must be. Austin, feeling a little nervous there, buddy? And he's probably over here sitting in his room thinking, oh my god, I still have a decomposing body in my crawl space. At some point, my room's gonna start stinking and my mom might smell it. And so he comes up with yet another brilliant idea. I'll just get rid of some of the parts. And that's exactly what he does. He grabs some of Jessica's remains and puts them inside of this black garbage bag, and then he drives to this isolated field in Arvada, about 7 miles away from Jessica's home, looking for where he can dump them at. And he ends up finding this spot like near a culvert, and he checks to make sure that no one's watching, and then he just leaves the bag there like it's regular trash. Then he drives home, probably thinking that he just covered his tracks, probably feeling like he just outsmarted everyone. But spoiler alert, he didn't. Because 3 days later, on October 10th, 5 days after Jessica disappeared, some maintenance workers are working out in that exact field doing their regular rounds, picking up trash. And one of them spots this black bag near the culvert. And he's probably thinking, okay, this is just regular trash. So he plans on walking over there to toss it into his truck. But when he lifts the bag, he immediately notices that it's way heavier than it should be. And there is this awful stench coming from it. So he sets it back down and he opens it. And I don't know why he did that, but he did. And what he finds makes him stumble backwards so fast that he almost falls. And I'm not even gonna go into all of the gory details because it is genuinely horrific, and I honestly don't think that any of us need this image in our heads. And so eventually police arrive and they secure the area and they carefully collect the remains and rush them to the coroner's office. And they pretty quickly figure out that these remains 100% 100% belong to Jessica Ridgway. So now these investigators, some of whom are parents themselves, are sitting here in this room. Some of them are bawling their eyes out because now they have to try to figure out a way to make this horrible phone call to Sarah. They have to tell this mother that her little girl is never walking through her front door again, never going to give her another hug, never going to grow up and go to college and get married and have her own kids. All of that is gone now because of one evil teenager. Now at this point, no one still has any idea who could have done all this. All they knew is that from the DNA evidence that they collected is that the perpetrator is a male. That's it. But then one afternoon, so about 2 weeks after finding that bag, a mother calls 911. And she sounds really distressed, but she takes one deep breath and says this.
Hi, I need you to come to my house. My son wants to turn himself in for the Jessica Ridgway murder.
So it turns out that for reasons that I don't fully understand, maybe Austin felt that investigators were like closing in on him. Maybe the guilt was eating him alive. Who knows? But he woke up one day and very anxiously walked over to his mom, Mindy, and said, "Mom, I have something horrible to tell you." And his mom, probably feeling like her entire world started to crumble, immediately asks what's wrong. And that's when Austin confesses everything. How he took Jessica, how he killed her, how he cut into her body in their bathtub, and how he put her pieces in their crawl space. And as you can imagine, Mindy's jaw absolutely hit the freaking floor. Like, imagine hearing that your own son, your own child, confesses that he did something so unspeakably evil to a little girl. Like, what do you even do in that moment? Is there a guidebook called What to Do When Your Son Becomes an Absolute Monster? But despite her feelings, despite the fact that that's her son, Mindy knew exactly what she had to do. She knew that her son had gone way too far and that she did not want him to hurt anyone else. And so the mother that called 911 that afternoon, turning her son in, was Mindy. And as she continued explaining to the dispatcher how her son did it, she said the sentence, "Her remains are in my house." That's not a sentence that you would ever expect to say, you know? Eventually, Mindy passes the phone to Austin and he starts saying, "I did it. I murdered Ridgway. You have to send a squad car here, like now. I'm confessing." And so police speed to Mindy's house with the lights flashing and the sirens wailing. I mean, you can imagine. And when they get there and they start searching, everything is exactly where Austin said it would be. The tools that he used, the cleaning supplies, pieces of Jessica's remains hidden in the crawl space, everything confirming that this innocent little girl was right here in this house while his mom was at work, completely unaware. Officers immediately cuff him. Good, now keep it like that. And he is taken into custody and brought to the station where he sits for a 6-hour confession, just laying out every single horrific detail. And when investigators ask him why would you do something like this, something so horrific to a child, Austin looks at them and he says, and this is a direct quote by the way, "I wanted to see what it felt like. I was fulfilling a sexual fantasy. I wanted to know if I could actually go through with killing someone." What? Okay guys, I'm done. Keep him locked up, please. Austin got tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Oh my God, why am I so obsessed with that sentence? Let me say it again. Without the possibility of parole, which means that he will die behind bars. He will never breathe fresh air again, and he will never see the outside world. And honestly, some people would argue that that's not nearly harsh enough for what he did. But what do you guys think? And listen, I know that this one was a heavy one. It absolutely destroyed me while I was researching and writing this. But I think that it is most important that we remember Jessica, not as a victim, but as a person who was loved and had so many dreams and deserved an amazing life. Every year on what would have been her birthday, Sarah actually releases these purple balloons into the sky to honor her daughter's memory. And I think that's beautiful. So if you made it this far, then maybe if you want, drop a purple heart in the comments. And if her mom or a family member ever sees this, then they know that Jessica will always be loved and remembered. I love you guys. Mwah, group hug.